The Whitcomb Memorial Founders Gala was the kind of event where everyone smiled with their teeth and meant almost none of it. And Elena Reyes had learned over 3 years of quietly excelling in a department that ran on precision and invisibility exactly how to smile like that, too. She stood near the edge of the ballroom in a midnight blue gown that skimmed rather than clung, her champagne flute serving mostly as something for her hands to do. At 29, Elena was a clinical pharmacist with a reputation for catching the mistakes other people missed. And tonight, she felt like exactly what she was, a woman who understood medicine far better than she understood parties. She smoothed the fabric at her hip without meaning to, an old habit worn into her like a groove in stone, built over 3 years with a man who used to look at her plate before he looked at her face. Grant Sutton was somewhere in the room, glad handing hospital board members on behalf of the pharmaceutical distributor that employed him, and Elena had spent the better part of an hour making sure the length of the ballroom stayed between them. She'd ended their engagement 3 months earlier. She told herself that meant she was free. Seeing him across the ballroom had taught her that freedom and distance were not always the same thing. But it wasn't Grant that pulled her away from the noise. It was a name. She slipped down a quieter corridor near the service stairs, phone in hand, pretending to answer an email so no one would stop her to talk. That's when she heard Grant's voice, low, urbane, pitched for exactly one listener, drifting from behind a half-closed door marked private function. She should have kept walking. She told herself that later, many times. Instead, she stopped because the second voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Whitfield, Chief of Internal Medicine, a man whose photograph hung in the hospital lobby beside a plaque about excellence in patient care, and because the two names being discussed behind that door made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Kane doesn't suspect anything. Whitfield's voice was soft and satisfied, the voice of a man discussing a golf handicap rather than a human being. Kane trusts the endocrine workup completely. As far as he's concerned, he was simply born without the wiring. Some men are. That's what I told him. That's what he believes. And the compound holds? The compound holds. Whitfield gave a quiet laugh. 6 years, Grant. 6 years of idiopathic this and congenital that. And he has never once asked why his own doctor keeps adjusting a dosage that's supposedly treating a condition that never improves. Men like him don't question the diagnosis. They question the world. It would never occur to Adrian Kane that the poison is coming from inside his own medicine cabinet. Elena's fingers went numb around her phone. Adrian Kane. Even people who had never set foot near the parts of the city Adrian Kane owned knew that name the way they knew the names of hurricanes, spoken carefully and only when necessary. The head of the Kane organization, a man who, according to whispered hospital gossip, Elena had always assumed was exaggeration, could make problems disappear as easily as other men made phone calls. And someone, her ex-fiancé and the hospital's own chief of medicine, was drugging him, deliberately, systematically, for years. She didn't understand all of it yet, standing frozen in that hallway with her heart slamming against her ribs, but she understood enough. She understood the shape of it the way she understood a dangerous drug interaction before she'd finished reading the chart. Something was being suppressed that should never have been suppressed at all, dressed up in a diagnosis designed to be permanent, designed never to be questioned. Who's paying for it? Whitfield's voice sharpened. Still touchy about that? Grant sounded almost amused. Worry about keeping your mouth shut and your signature off anything that isn't buried 3 systems deep. The Drazens don't pay men who talk. The Drazens? Elena's stomach dropped straight through the floor. Victor Drazen. Even she knew that name. The rival syndicate that had been quietly bleeding into Kane territory for the better part of a decade? apparently now bleeding into something far more intimate than territory. A chair scraped somewhere beyond the door. "Did you hear that?" Whitfield's voice sharpened instantly. Elena didn't wait. She was already moving, her heels silent against the carpet runner, her pulse a hard, hot drum in her throat as she rounded the corner back to the ballroom on legs that didn't feel entirely like her own. She had learned something tonight that could get people killed. She was fairly certain that included her. She didn't make it back to the safety of the crowd. "Elena." Grant's voice came from directly behind her, closer than it had any right to be. She turned. There he was, golden and handsome and utterly without conscience, the kind of face that photographed beautifully at hospital fundraisers and had once told her, very gently, that she'd let herself go the year her mother died. "You look pale." He tilted his head. "Everything all right?" "Fine." She heard how unconvincing it sounded even to her own ears. Something shifted behind his eyes, a small, cold recalculation. "You were down by the service stairs." It wasn't a question. Elena felt the trap close a half-second before she understood its shape. She turned and walked, fast, back into the noise and light of the ballroom, praying it would swallow her before he decided to follow. He followed. She could feel it behind her the way you feel weather changing, a pressure at the back of her neck, footsteps matching her pace exactly, patient and certain. A man who had spent 3 years teaching her that there was no point in running from him because he would always, always catch up. She cut left through a service hallway she'd noticed earlier, heels sinking slightly into carpet gone soft with age. The ballroom's noise fell away behind a set of heavy doors. The corridor beyond was narrow and dim, lined with closed conference rooms, and it ended in a blank wall, a dead end. Elena's breath came in short, useless pulls. Behind her, Grant's footsteps went quiet. That was worse. Grant quiet meant Grant sure. Then she saw him. A man stood alone near the end of the corridor, half turned toward a framed print on the wall as if it held some private fascination for him. Tall, dark-suited, utterly still. Something about his stillness didn't read as calm. It read as coiled. Elena didn't have time to be afraid of a stranger. She only had time to be afraid of the man behind her. She crossed the distance in 4 fast steps, caught the stranger's lapels in both hands before he'd fully turned, and heard herself whisper, the desperation in her voice far greater than she intended. "Please, pretend you're my husband." And then she kissed him. For one suspended second, nothing in Adrian Kane's body knew what to do with what was happening. 34 years of iron discipline, 34 years of a mind that processed threats and angles and exits before it processed anything else, and none of it had prepared him for a stranger in a blue dress grabbing his jacket and pressing her mouth to his like it was the only door left in a burning building. He should have stepped back. Every instinct that had kept him alive this long told him to assess first, act second. Instead, his hands found her waist, not shoving her away, which is what his brain, half a beat behind his body, seemed to expect of itself, but settling there, drawing her closer, as though some older and more elemental part of him had simply decided, without consulting the rest, that this was correct. And then, something happened that had never, in his entire adult life, happened to Adrian Kane. Heat. Not metaphorical heat, not the phrase people used for anger, hunger, or ambition, all the things he understood intimately and had built an empire from. Actual heat. Low and shocking and entirely physical, spreading from him from a point of contact he had been told by 3 different specialists over 6 patient years that his body was simply incapable of producing. His mind went very briefly and very completely blank. He was still trying to understand that impossible sensation when he registered footsteps passing the mouth of the alcove, fast and receding, followed by a man's voice muttering something under his breath before the sound faded down the corridor. The woman pulled back first, breathless, her lipstick slightly smudged, her hands still fisted in the fabric of his jacket, as though she hadn't given herself permission to let go. I'm so sorry. She stared somewhere around the level of his tie. There was a man, my ex. I panicked. I didn't know what else. She looked up. Adrian watched the exact moment she understood what she'd walked into. Her eyes moved over his face, the kind of face people in his world had learned, at considerable cost, to read correctly and quickly, and every drop of color left her cheeks. Is that so? He made his voice mild because it was the only thing he trusted himself to do, while half his attention was still occupied with the impossible fact that his own pulse was audible in his ears. Then came the sound that made her freeze totally. Soft, synchronized clicks. His security detail. 4 men stepped from the adjoining hallway, weapons half raised, faces blank with the particular blankness of men waiting for one word. Boss. Dante's gun remained trained toward the corridor. Problem? Adrian looked at Elena. No problem. He raised 2 fingers, and the guns vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, tucked away with the same silent precision. The lady was hiding from someone, that's all. I have to go. Before he could answer, she slipped past him and disappeared around the corner. Adrian remained where he was long after the sound of her heels faded. His fingers moved almost unconsciously toward his lower lip, touching the place where her mouth had been. For a man who had spent most of his adult life treating his body as a machine whose limitations were already understood, the sensation left behind was deeply unsettling. It wasn't merely that he had responded to her. It was that, for several impossible seconds, he had felt as though some locked room inside him had opened without permission. Why her? The question followed him long after he left the hotel. Elena didn't remember the cab ride home. She remembered standing in her kitchen afterward with her shoes still on, staring at nothing, replaying 2 separate horrors on an endless loop. Grant's voice behind a closed door discussing a man's ruined body like a line item, and her own mouth against a stranger who had turned out to be the single most dangerous man in the city, Adrian Kane. She hadn't recognized him in the moment. How could she have? She had been running for her life, or something close to it. But Dante's whispered boss, the guns, and the way 4 grown men in tactical black had gone stone still waiting for a single word from him had told her everything her racing brain needed to know. She had accidentally used a Mafia don as a human shield, and she was fairly sure, standing there, replaying the way his hands had settled at her waist, that she had felt something in that kiss that had absolutely no business belonging to a moment of pure panic. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself, several times, with decreasing conviction, that she would never see him again. She was wrong within 4 days. Adrian did not chase things. That was one of the fundamental architectures of his existence. He did not want things he could not have, because wanting was a liability he'd trained out of himself before he was old enough to shave. The one thing his body had never once offered him, in 3.5 decades of living, was ordinary desire. He had been told it was congenital, idiopathic, a private, permanent flaw folded quietly into the architecture of a man everyone else in the city was terrified of. He had discovered it in his 20s during a physical he'd only submitted to because a doctor his father trusted had insisted, and it had been confirmed year after year by specialists who all eventually arrived at some version of the same shrug. Some men are simply built this way. He had made peace with it the way he made peace with everything, by refusing to let it matter. Power did not require desire. An empire did not require a body that worked the way other men's bodies worked. He had told himself that so many times, for so many years, that it had calcified into something almost like belief. Then a stranger in a blue dress put her mouth against his, and every one of those careful, load-bearing certainties had cracked down the middle. He tested it quietly and methodically because Adrian Kane did not believe in coincidences, and he certainly did not believe in miracles. The alternative explanation, the one he refused to look at directly, was somehow worse than either. The first woman was someone an associate had recommended precisely because her discretion was absolute. She was beautiful, intelligent, experienced, and completely aware of the kind of man she was sitting across from. Adrian gave her every opportunity to make the evening ordinary. Nothing happened. No spark, no heat, no inexplicable physical response, only the familiar, hollow absence he'd known for years. The second woman was a former acquaintance who had made her interest plain on more than one occasion. She knew him well enough that there was no awkwardness, no unfamiliarity, no reason for his body to retreat behind the same old wall if Elena had simply been an accident of adrenaline. Nothing happened with her, either. Adrian sat afterward in the back of the car, staring through the window at the city passing beyond the glass. He had wanted the experiment to prove him wrong. Instead, it had made the truth impossible to ignore. It had happened exactly once, with exactly one woman. By the fourth day, he stopped pretending he was conducting an experiment. He was searching for an explanation. Dante found him in the basement office at 2 a.m, staring at a single grainy still from the hotel's hallway security footage. A blue dress, dark hair, a face turned half away from the camera. "You want me to find her?" It wasn't a question. "I want to know why." Dante studied him for a moment. "That's not the same thing." "No." Adrian's gaze remained on the screen. "But find her anyway." It took Dante 11 days, 3 false leads, and one uncomfortably direct conversation with a hotel employee to arrive at a name: Elena Reyes, 29, clinical pharmacist at Whitcomb, Memorial. Formerly engaged to Grant Sutton of Meridian Pharmaceutical Distribution. Adrian read the file twice. He stopped both times on the same line. Formerly engaged. Something unfamiliar tightened low in his chest at the thought of another man's hands on her. He went to find her himself. She was leaving the hospital staff entrance on a gray Tuesday evening, a cardigan pulled trite over her scrubs, when she looked up and saw the black Maybach idling at the curb, and beside it, a man she had spent 11 days trying to convince herself she had imagined. "You, Elena Reyes." She watched surprise move across her face, followed immediately by fear. "I don't know what you do." His voice remained quiet. "I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted you hurt, Miss Reyes, you would already know it." It should not be reassuring, and yet some small, illogical part of her believed him completely. "Get in the car." He paused. "Please." It was the please that undid her. In 3 years with Grant, please was a word he used the way other men used threats, soft on the surface, iron underneath. From Adrian Kane, standing there with his hands loose and open at his sides, deliberately not crowding her, the word sounded almost like an apology. She got in the car. He didn't take her to the penthouse. He took her instead to a quiet Italian restaurant that turned out, once they were seated in a private back room, to be entirely his, staff and all, cleared for the evening. "You overheard something." Adrian poured water into her glass. "At the gala, that's what you were running from, not just your ex." Elena's hands went cold around the stem of her glass. "I don't know what you mean." "Miss Reyes." He leaned forward slightly. I've spent 6 years being told my body doesn't work the way other men's bodies work. Congenital, idiopathic. Take your pick of words designed to close a conversation rather than open one. His eyes held hers. And then, 11 days ago, a stranger kissed me in a hallway, and for exactly the length of that kiss, every single thing I had been told about myself turned out to be a lie. Elena's breath caught. I have tried to explain it away. I've spent the better part of 2 weeks trying to convince myself it was a fluke, a trick of adrenaline, anything except what I'm beginning to suspect it actually is. He paused. Then my people tell me that the same night and the same building, my own physician's name came up in a conversation about a woman running scared down a service corridor. His voice lowered. So I'll ask you once, plainly, what did you hear? For a long moment, Elena simply looked at him. Really looked. And she understood with a clarity that frightened her more than the gunman had, that if she told him what she knew, she would be handing this man a truth capable of unmaking the entire architecture of his life. If I tell you, people are going to die. People already decided that when they chose to poison me for 6 years. His expression hardened. Tell me. So she did. She told him everything. The corridor, the half-open door, Whitfield's oily satisfaction, Grant's careless cruelty, the word brazen spoken like an answer to a question Adrian apparently had been asking his own reflection for the better part of a decade. She watched his face while she spoke. This was a man who had built an entire life around the discipline of not reacting. And yet, she could see the strain in the set of his jaw, the gradual stillness settling over him as each detail found its place. When she finished, silence settled between them. 6 years. Adrian's voice was almost too quiet to hear. His eyes remained fixed on the table for several seconds, as though the words themselves had become something physical he needed to examine before allowing himself to look at her. 6 years. I let that man adjust my dosage like he was tuning an instrument. He tightened his fingers around the stem of his untouched glass. I believed him when he told me my own body had betrayed me. He looked up. Something had changed in his face. The controlled anger was there, but underneath it was something far more painful, a disbelief so deep it seemed to have momentarily displaced every other emotion. Say that again. Elena hesitated. Adrian. Please. The word was quieter this time. What did you say? Her throat tightened. I said it was deliberate. The medication wasn't treating the condition they told you you had. It was creating and maintaining the condition. His face went completely still. Sabotage. Elena nodded. Yes. He leaned back slowly. For several seconds, he seemed unable to move. 6 years. The number wasn't merely a measurement of time. It was 6 years of physical examinations, prescriptions, blood tests, specialist consultations, private frustrations, and nights when he had wondered why his body refused to respond to something everyone else seemed to take for granted. 6 years of being told that there was nothing to fix because nothing had ever been wrong in the first place. He had built an explanation around himself and then built an entire identity inside it. Congenital, idiopathic, permanent. Words that had once seemed clinical now felt almost obscene. His hand moved from the glass to the edge of the table. I believed them. The admission came out with a bitterness Elena hadn't expected. I actually believed them. She watched his throat move as he swallowed. I spent years convincing myself that it didn't matter. Every time someone asked why I never dated, why I never wanted anyone, why I never... He stopped, jaw tightening. I told myself it was simply the way I was made. His eyes lowered. I thought I was the defect. Elena's chest tightened. You weren't. He gave a humorless laugh. Do you know what that does to a person? She didn't answer. He wasn't really asking her to. It changes the way you remember your own life. Every disappointment becomes evidence. Every relationship that never happened becomes proof that something inside you was missing. His fingers curled against the table. And all this time, someone was making sure I would never discover the truth. The anger finally broke through. Adrian stood so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. He turned away from her, one hand braced against the back of the chair as he fought for control. Elena remained silent. She could see the battle happening inside him, rage demanding an outlet, humiliation insisting on silence, and beneath both of them, the grief of a man realizing that years of self-acceptance had been built on a lie. When he finally spoke, his voice had become frighteningly calm. They didn't just poison me. He stared towards the dark window. They taught me to hate something about myself that was never broken. That was the wound. Not the compound, not even the conspiracy. It was the stolen certainty, the years he could never recover. The countless moments when he had looked at himself and quietly decided that something fundamentally absent from him. He had thought he was protecting himself by accepting the diagnosis. Now he understood that acceptance had been part of the trap. Elena rose slowly. I understand medication. Her voice was gentle. If you'll let me, I can look at what you've actually been prescribed. I can tell you what it's really doing, whatever Woodfield's been calling it. Adrian looked at her. You would do that, knowing what it might mean, knowing who I am. She shook her head. You didn't hurt me when you had every reason to think I was a threat. You held your men back. That's not nothing. Adrian studied her. I am not offering you protection out of gratitude. His voice dropped. I want to know why it was you. I want to understand what happened in that hallway. He paused. And I don't believe I'll understand it from a distance. He leaned back. So I'm asking you to stay close to me, not as a prisoner, as someone I would very much like to know. She should have said no. Every rational part of her screamed at her to say no. Okay. The investigation began the following morning. This time there was no romantic fog around it. Elena insisted on seeing the complete medication history before she would allow Adrian to change anything. Adrian gave her access to everything. Every prescription, every laboratory result, every specialist report, every pharmacy record. She worked out of a converted office 3 blocks from the hospital, close enough to keep her shifts, and private enough that no one from Whitcomb Memorial would think to look for her there. Within hours, the first inconsistency appeared. A compound buried beneath 3 layers of generic naming conventions had been repeatedly prescribed under different formulations. Elena stared at the numbers, then checked them again. That's wrong. Adrian stood across from her. How wrong? Wrong enough that I don't want to tell you until I've checked it 3 times. He almost smiled. Then check it 3 times. She did. And the answer remained the same. The compounds had no legitimate therapeutic purpose in the way Whitfield had described it. It suppressed the very function the physicians claimed they were trying to evaluate. More disturbing was the timing. Every time Adrian's laboratory results began trending toward normal, the dosage increased. Not randomly, precisely. Look, she turned the chart toward him. Your numbers were improving here. Her finger moved. 2 weeks later, the dosage increased. Again. And here, another page. Same pattern. Adrian's eyes narrowed. You're saying he was watching the results. I'm saying someone was. She looked up, and they were intervening whenever your body started proving the diagnosis wrong. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Adrian reached for the file. Who had access? Whitfield? She tapped another page. Possibly the endocrine department and whoever processed the prescriptions. Can you find out? Yes. He looked at her. Then find out. The first real breakthrough came 3 days later. Elena found a pharmacy authorization trail that had been manually overridden twice. The first override occurred 6 years earlier. The second, 18 months later. The person who approved both had no legitimate reason to have access to Adrian's medical records. Her name was Naomi Cross, junior laboratory technician. Elena tracked her down after work. Naomi initially refused to speak. Then Elena showed her the authorization trail. Naomi's face changed. I didn't know what it was. What did you do? I changed numbers. Elena's stomach tightened. Whose numbers? Naomi looked toward the empty corridor. His. She lowered her voice. They told me I was correcting contaminated samples. Who told you? Dr. Whitfield. And Grant Sutton? Naomi hesitated. I've seen him. Where? With Whitfield. That was enough to make Elena's pulse quicken. How often? Not often, Naomi swallowed, but whenever Adrian Kane's results changed. Adrian listened to Elena's report without interrupting. When she finished, he stood beside the window, one hand resting against the glass. So Grant wasn't merely aware. No. Elena closed the file. He had access. To the records? To the process. Adrian turned. Then this started earlier than the gala. Much earlier. His expression became unreadable. Find me everything. I will. He looked at her for a moment. And Elena, yes? Don't go back to Whitcomb alone. I have a job. I know. I can't simply disappear. I'm not asking you to. His gaze hardened. I'm asking you to stop giving people who may be watching you easy opportunities. She crossed her arms. You do realize you sound extremely controlling. I do. And I'll try to improve. The unexpected answer caught her off guard, and a reluctant smile touched her mouth. The investigation continued. So did the attraction. Neither of them pretended otherwise anymore. One evening, Elena was reviewing a series of laboratory results when she looked up and found Adrian watching her. What? Nothing. You've been staring at me for 5 minutes. I was thinking. That's dangerous. His mouth curved. I was thinking that you're different when you're working. Different how? Certain. She raised an eyebrow. I'm always certain. No. He leaned back. With me, you question everything. Because you're difficult. Probably. But with the files, you don't hesitate. Because the numbers don't care who you are. Adrian smiled. That's what I like about you. She looked at him. What? You don't become impressed by power. I've seen what power does when the wrong person has it. Her voice changed slightly. That's why. He understood immediately. Grant. Adrian's expression darkened. He hurt you. He made me believe I was the problem. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was wrong. You don't have to fix everything. I know. He paused. But I can still tell you when someone is wrong. Time softened around them for a moment, and Elena smiled despite herself. But there was something else Adrian had not yet said. He had spent days testing the boundaries of what Elena meant to him, and the results had become increasingly inconvenient. One evening, after she had gone home, Dante found him alone in the office. "You've been thinking about her." Adrian didn't look up. "I think about many things." "Not like this." Adrian's eyes lifted. Dante leaned against the doorway. "The two women." Adrian went still. "You knew?" "I know you." Dante's expression remained deliberately neutral. "You arranged those meetings because you wanted to prove the woman at the gala wasn't different." Adrian looked toward the dark window. "I wanted to know if my body had reacted to stress." "And?" "Nothing." "Both times?" "Both." Dante nodded slowly. "So you know." "I know that whatever happened that night wasn't random." "That's not what I meant." Adrian was silent. Dante waited. Finally, Adrian said, "I don't know what to do with her." "That sounds like a problem." "It is." "Why?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Because I find myself caring about things I shouldn't." Dante's expression changed slightly. "Such as?" "The way she looks when she's concentrating. The fact that she apologizes before she realizes she doesn't need to. The way she gets angry when someone treats her like she's less intelligent than she is." He paused. "The way she laughed tonight." Dante gave him a knowing look. Adrian frowned. "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." Dante smiled. "You've got it bad, boss." Adrian looked back at the city. "I've spent my entire life believing wanting something made you vulnerable. And now I'm beginning to think wanting the right thing might simply make you human." The admission unsettled him more than the original physical reaction ever had. It was also the moment he understood that Elena was no longer merely the answer to a medical question. She was becoming the answer to a much more dangerous one. Why did he want her? Not because she had kissed him, not because his body had responded to her, not because she was beautiful. He wanted her because she argued with him, because she looked at his power and still saw a man, because she could stand over a stack of falsified medical records and become furious on his behalf before remembering that he was dangerous, because she had every reason to fear him and still chosen to stay, and because, somewhere along the way, he had stopped wanting to know why she awakened something in him and started wanting to know who she was when she wasn't afraid. The possessiveness arrived quietly, in pieces. It was there when a resident lingered a beat too long at the nurse's station where Elena was reviewing a chart. Adrian appeared, unhurried, with 2 coffees and an entirely unnecessary question about her schedule, and the resident found somewhere else to be. "That wasn't subtle," Elena said afterward. "I wasn't trying to be." He handed her the coffee. "I was trying to be present." She fought a smile. It sharpened the following week when Grant's name came up in a briefing, a sighting near the hospital, nothing confirmed, and Adrian's posture went taut and dangerous in a way she hadn't seen since the gala. "He's not to come within 100 feet of her." Elena looked up. "You don't get to decide where I go." "No." His voice softened. "I decide what I do when someone threatens you." She studied him. "And what are you planning to do?" "Keep him away from you." "Without killing him?" His eyes held hers. "That depends on him." "Adrian." He exhaled. "I'll keep him alive." "Thank you. But I won't make him comfortable." She rolled her eyes. "Progress." The words should have been enough, but Elena knew by then that there was something beneath his protectiveness that was more vulnerable than possessive. He was afraid, not of losing control of his empire, not of Drazen, not of Whitfield, of losing her. She saw it the first time he reached for her hand after Grant's name came up. as though touching her was his way of confirming that she was still there. And she understood something then that mattered more than his power. Grant had controlled her by making escape impossible. Adrian was trying to protect her without making her smaller. The difference mattered. She crossed the room and kissed him. It was the second time she had kissed him, and entirely her own choice now. No danger behind her, no man chasing her, no desperate excuse. Adrian went still for a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her. When he finally pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing unsteadily, he said, "That was different." "I know." She touched his face. "I wanted it to be." The first time, she had kissed him to disappear. This time, she had kissed him to be found. But even as the space between them narrowed, the world outside it was closing in. Naomi Cross stopped coming to work. 2 shifts, then 3. Her apartment was empty. Her landlord said she'd moved out early. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Adrian listened to the report. "Find her." "We're trying." "No." His voice was quiet. "Find her." His men found the first surveillance van outside Elena's building that night. It was empty. Its equipment had been removed. But the angle of the camera told Adrian everything he needed to know. They had been watching Elena's apartment. He arrived before she could leave. "You're moving." She stared at him. "No." "Yes." "Adrian, you can be angry with me in the car." She folded her arms. "I am not moving into your penthouse because you decided it." His expression changed. "I didn't say you were." He held out his hand. "I'm asking." That stopped her. "I'm asking because I don't want to spend another night wondering whether someone is watching your window." She looked at his hand, then at him. "Will you give me a choice?" "Always." She took his hand. The final piece came 4 nights later. Elena was cross-referencing Whitfield's paperwork against the hospital's original archive copies when she found a name on a recurring wire transfer. Grant Sutton, a quarterly consulting retainer, paid without interruption for 6 years, the exact length of Adrian's treatment. She stared at the number, then at the date, then back at the number. He wasn't just informed. Adrian looked over. "Who?" "Grant." She pushed the document toward him. "He was paid." Adrian read it. His expression changed. Not anger, something colder. "The original records?" "In the sub-basement archive." "Are they digitized?" "Not completely." "Then that's where they'll go next." Elena looked up. "Why?" "Because anyone who understands what we found will know the originals are the last clean evidence." She stood. "Then we go now." The hospital's private archive was a long, concrete room, lined with steel cabinets, lit by a single row of buzzing fluorescent tubes. Elena had been down there 100 times in 3 years and had never once found it anything but boring. Tonight, it felt like the inside of a held breath. Adrian entered first, with Dante immediately behind while the other 2 men took the rear corridors and side corridors. He did not leave Elena trailing behind him. He stayed close enough to see her, close enough to reach her, his attention moving constantly across the room as his men secured the archive. "Third row, fireproof unit 4. Elena pointed toward the cabinet. "Stay with me." Adrian's gaze swept the room. "Take the cabinet." Dante moved while one of his men checked the archive entrance and the other watched the rear corridor. Only after the room had been visually cleared did Adrian nod. "Go." Elena moved toward the cabinet, Adrian remaining several steps behind her, close enough that she could hear his shoes against the concrete. She reached the fireproof unit and unlocked it. Inside were 6 years of unaltered requisitions, real numbers, real signatures, real proof. She pulled the first folder free. Then the lights went out. Every fluorescent tube died simultaneously, and total darkness swallowed the archive. Elena! Adrian's voice cut through the black. She heard the safety of one of his men's weapons click off. Then the archive door exploded inward. Muzzle flashes strobed through the darkness. The first burst of gunfire came from the entrance. Adrian reacted instantly. Contact! His hand caught Elena's arm, and he tried to pull her toward him, but the first volley forced them apart as the attackers advanced through the doorway. Get behind the cabinets. He shoved her toward the nearest row. Elena dropped behind the steel shelving, clutching the fireproof case against her chest. Adrian was already moving toward the source of the gunfire, his men returning fire as the archive became a chaos of muzzle flashes, shouting, ricochets, and pounding footsteps. She pressed herself against the cold metal and listened desperately for Adrian through the chaos. His voice came through in fragments, sometimes clear enough to understand, sometimes swallowed by gunfire. Left side. Move. Keep the door. She didn't know exactly where he was, but she knew enough to understand that he was moving through the room, controlling his men and trying to keep the attackers from reaching her. Then, through the confusion, she heard his voice again. Closer. He knew where she was. The realization settled into her with a strange, immediate certainty. He had been only a few steps away when the attack began, and the first thing he had done had been to reach for her. The knowledge steadied her. She looked down at the documents, then at the cabinet. The evidence couldn't disappear. Not tonight. Not after everything they'd already risked. She opened the case and pulled the original file against her chest. Then she remembered something. She had prepared duplicate copies earlier that afternoon because she'd learned as a pharmacist that important information should never exist in only one place. Her hand went into her bag. The smaller folder was there. She crouched lower and pushed the duplicate folder behind the cabinet's lower base plate, working it into the narrow gap beneath the steel frame, just as footsteps approached her row. Not Adrian's. These footsteps were too quiet, too deliberate. Elena froze. She barely had time to draw breath before a gun appeared around the corner. The shot came from behind her. The attacker dropped. Dante emerged through the smoke and seized her arm. Move, now. She ran. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes, but to Elena it felt like an hour. When the emergency lights finally flickered back on, the archive looked nothing like the place she entered. Documents lay scattered across the floor. One cabinet had been hit by several bullets, and smoke hung beneath the ceiling. Adrian was already crossing the room. He didn't stop to question his men. He didn't stop to inspect the attackers. He came directly to her. Elena. His hands moved over her arms, her shoulders, her face. Are you hit? I'm fine. Where? I'm not hurt. He looked at her again, searching her face as though he needed visual proof before he could believe the words. Are you sure? Yes. Only then did his hands fall. He saw the fear he hadn't managed to hide. Not anger, fear. I heard the first shot. His voice was low. I knew you were on that side of the room. She touched his wrist. I'm here. His eyes closed for half a second. Then he pulled her against him. Not possessively, not as a man claiming something, as a man making sure someone was real. The records, she said. He looked down. I hid duplicates. His expression shifted. You did what? I hid a duplicate set before they reached me. A rough laugh escaped him. You hid evidence during a firefight. I'm good under pressure. He shook his head. Apparently. Then Dante's voice came from behind them. Boss. Adrian turned. We caught one. A man was dragged into the archive. His face was bruised. His hands were bound. He looked at Elena, then at Adrian. Sutton. Adrian's expression went cold. Bring him in. They brought Grant into the wrecked archive 20 minutes later. His handsome face was blotched with fury. Elena? She looked at him. Tell them this isn't what it looks like. She said nothing. Drazen made me. Grant's voice cracked. He said if I didn't cooperate, stop. Her voice was quiet, steady. You spent 3 years telling me my body was a problem I should apologize for. Grant stared at her. And the whole time, you were helping poison a man. I didn't know it would go this far. You knew enough. He shook his head. You don't understand. No. She looked at him for a long moment. I understand perfectly. Her voice hardened. You were a coward who sold people out the second it became convenient. Grant's face twisted. Elena, you didn't break me. She stepped closer. You just wasted 3 years I could have spent somewhere I actually belonged. Grant looked toward Adrian. For the first time, real fear entered his face. Adrian's hand closed around the back of Grant's collar. Take him. He struggled. Adrian, listen. Adrian looked at him. You're going to tell us everything. The next 2 weeks were a controlled collapse. Whitefield was arrested first. Then the financial network connecting him to the Drazens began unraveling. Naomi Cross was found alive, terrified, exhausted, but alive. She gave investigators the final pieces they needed to connect the altered laboratory results to Whitefield's office. Grant's records filled the remaining gaps. 6 years of payments, 6 years of instructions, 6 years of deliberate medical sabotage. Adrian's medication was stopped under the supervision of a specialist Elena chose herself. Recovery was not instantaneous. His body needed time. So did he. The first time a new laboratory result came back showing his hormones moving toward normal, Adrian stared at the page for a long time. How long? Elena sat across the desk. Until what? Until I stop wondering whether the next result will prove it was another lie. She reached across the desk. You don't have to stop wondering today. He looked at her. You'll stay? If you want me to. I do. She squeezed his hand. Then I'll stay. It took a month for 6 years of deliberate suppression to fully clear his system, and longer than that for Adrian to stop flinching faintly every time his own body did something he had spent 6 years being told it couldn't. She was there for all of it, not because he demanded it, but because somewhere between a hotel hallway and a firefight in a records archive, she'd become someone he reached for instinctively. Sometimes it was in the small hours when the anger at Whitfield resurfaced. Sometimes it was in ordinary evenings when nothing at all was wrong and he simply wanted her near. One gray morning, she found him sitting very still on the edge of the bed and understood immediately what had woken him. Bad night? His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard him. I keep hearing the gunfire, he said. I keep thinking about the 2 minutes I didn't know if you were alive. He looked at her, and whatever was in his face then had none of the careful architecture he showed the rest of the world. I've run this city for 6 years and never once been afraid the way I was afraid in that archive. Elena sat beside him. I built my whole life on the idea that nothing could touch me because there was nothing I couldn't afford to lose. He looked down at their joined hands. I didn't understand how much of a lie that was until that night. Elena laced her fingers through his and said nothing, because some truths didn't need an answer, they only needed to be heard. Weeks became a season. The danger receded, the relationship remained. Adrian became less interested in proving that Elena belonged with him and more interested in discovering who she was when she wasn't afraid. He learned that she hated being rushed in the morning, that she liked strong coffee, and that she had an almost embarrassing obsession with the reality baking show. He learned that she could argue for 20 minutes about whether a soggy bottom was a technical failure or a moral one. He learned that she became quieter when she was hurt, that she rubbed the edge of her thumb against her palm when she was nervous, and that she hated being told to calm down. Elena learned Adrian's quieter language, the way he loosened his tie when he was exhausted, the way he became silent when he was angry enough to frighten everyone else, the way he always checked the locks twice before bed, the way he pretended not to care about the stray cat Dante had eventually adopted. Their conversations changed with the danger. There were evenings when they discussed the investigation, Woodfield, the Drazens, or the remnants of the organization that nearly destroyed Adrian's life. But there were just as many nights when none of that entered the room at all. Sometimes Adrian arrived with dinner and listened while Elena complained about a television contestant who had somehow ruined a perfectly good pastry. Sometimes she would catch him reading a report with his glasses low on his nose and realize that the terrifying Adrian Kane of city rumors was at that moment simply a tired man trying to finish his work. Those were the moments that changed her most, because she had spent 3 years believing powerful men needed women to become smaller around them. Adrian seemed to be doing the opposite. He made room. One evening they sat together on the terrace. The city glittered below them. Elena leaned against the railing. "You know what I still don't understand?" Adrian looked at her. "What? Why me?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know." She turned toward him. He continued, "I used to think I needed an explanation. You don't? I think I spent too much time trying to turn something human into a medical problem." She smiled. And I don't know why my body responded to you." He looked at her. "But I know why I stayed." Her expression softened. "Why?" "Because you were the first person who saw something wrong with my life and cared about the wrongness before you cared about the danger." He reached for her hand. "You saw me as a person before you saw me as Adrian Kane." She intertwined her fingers with his. "I was terrified of you." "I know. I still am sometimes." He smiled faintly. "Good." She laughed. "That's not romantic." "It means you're sensible." She shook her head. "You're impossible." "I've been told." The words settled between them, warm and strangely peaceful. Then Elena looked at him. "Do you ever think about that night?" He answered, "Every day." She raised an eyebrow. "The kiss?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked out over the city. "Because I spent 11 days thinking the answer was hidden in what happened to my body." He turned back to her. "Then I spent another several weeks realizing the more important question was what happened to the rest of me." She waited. "I had spent years believing I couldn't want anyone." His thumb moved slowly across the back of her hand. "Then I met you, and suddenly I wanted to know your name, where you lived, whether you were safe, why you hated certain foods, why you laughed the way you did." His expression softened, and eventually I realized I wasn't trying to understand my body anymore. "What were you trying to understand?" "You." Elena smiled. "That's a much harder problem." "I know." "Good." The possessiveness never disappeared. It simply learned manners. When a man flirted with Elena at a restaurant, Adrian noticed. When the man asked for her number, Adrian's expression changed. Elena saw it immediately. "Don't." "I haven't done anything." "You were thinking something." "I was thinking several things." She laughed. "Keep them to yourself." She leaned closer, her smile widening at the irritation he was trying and failing to hide. "Fine." His gaze remained on the man for another moment before returning to Elena. "But he's still irritating." She kissed his cheek. "Survive." "I'll try." Her smile lingered as she shook her head at him. And Adrian found himself watching that expression with the same quiet fascination that had first unsettled him in the hotel corridor. He could still be possessive, still protective, still dangerous, but Elena had taught him that loving her did not mean controlling her. It meant making sure she could choose him freely. And Elena was learning that being protected did not have to mean being possessed. It could mean having someone stand beside you while you remained entirely yourself. Then one evening, Elena found him on the terrace again. The city was spread beneath them, gold and glittering. Adrian stood beside the railing. A small velvet box rested beside his hand. She stopped. He looked at her. For once, the man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals and order entire organizations around looked uncertain. "I'm not asking you to be anything you don't want to be." He picked up the box. "Not my wife because you owe me, not because you're afraid to leave, not because my world makes it difficult to walk away." He opened it. Inside was a ring. "You can walk away from all of it." His voice softened. "The money, the danger, me." He swallowed. "But if you don't want to walk away," he looked directly into his eyes, "I'd like the rest of my life to look like this." She stepped closer. "You, steady beside me." Another step brought her within reach of him. Nothing hidden. She stopped in front of him. No lies. He held out his hand. No obligation. Elena looked at the ring, then at the man she'd met in a dark corridor months earlier. The woman she'd been that night had been running from one man. The man she'd kissed had been running from a lie he'd lived inside for 6 years. Neither of them had known what was coming. Now she did. She knew Adrian could be dangerous. She knew his world would never be ordinary. She knew loving him meant accepting a life that would always carry shadows around its edges. But she also knew something else. He had never once asked her to become smaller so he could feel bigger. He had never asked her to apologize for her body. He had never demanded that she surrender her choices to his power. And when he was afraid of losing her, he had learned to ask rather than command. That mattered. Elena stepped into him. Yes. His breath caught. Yes. She smiled. This. She touched his face. Always this. Then she kissed him. This time, there was no desperate hallway, no Grant, no gunfire, no secret she needed to hide. Just choice. Adrian's arms came around her. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. A quiet laugh escaped him. "Mia Bella." She smiled. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just agreed to." "Then you'd better spend the rest of our lives showing me." "I intend to." She kissed him again. And somewhere above the glittering city, Adrian Kane, the man who had once believed an essential part of himself had been taken from him forever, laughed with happiness so unguarded that Elena suspected very few people alive had ever heard it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control what came next. He simply wanted to live it with her. If Elena and Adrian's story kept you hooked from that first desperate kiss to the very last moment, let us know in the comments. And stay close because there are more stories like this one waiting for you.